Welcome to this brand new podcast series, Life as a Neurodivergent Student, a collaboration between Student Minds and all things mental health, a part of Student Mind Student Space Resources. This series explores neurodivergent experiences of mental health and well-being in higher education. I'm Liza. I'm a psychology and cognitive neuroscience student at the University of Nottingham.
I'm Arya. I am pursuing a Bachelor of Music at the Royal Academy of Music in London.
Whether you've been diagnosed with ADHD, dyspraxia, and autism, or are still exploring your identity, this episode is here to support you with honesty, compassion, and ideas you can actually try. So, Arya, what do you think neurodivergence is?
So, the concept of neurodivergence, it refers to the fact that there is a natural variation in how people's brains work, and that some individuals experience and process information differently from what could be considered typical or neurotypical. But it is important to understand in general that neurodivergence is not a disease. It simply implies a difference in functioning of someone's brain, and the things that we're going to talk about today specifically cater to studying in general to help you manage the symptoms that might come with that. But there are some initial points that we have to consider is that firstly, you are not faulty or broken in any way just because you might be struggling with this. It is okay to struggle with this. Liza and I have both been through this and are still going through this actively, and we have implemented strategies over time to make sure that we can use the best parts of neurodivergence to our advantage while we're studying. This is not something to beat oneself up over. It is not a fault or a defect, and just because your brain works differently than somebody else's, it does not make it wrong or broken in any way. Another thing that I think most neurodivergent individuals might struggle with executive function. Liza, I know you have some opinions about that, so I was wondering what you think about how the struggles with executive function works for a neurodivergent individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Executive function is something most neurodivergent students struggles with. It just refers to a set of mental skills that helps a person regulate their lives or organize their lives, such as time management, starting different tasks, prioritizing work according to importance and what needs to be done quickly. And as a student, studying is a big part of this. But aside from the process of studying, as a student, we also have to take into account what happens before studying. So the planning that comes with studying, time management that comes with actually attending lectures, preparing for lectures before attending the lectures itself. Sometimes even pulling yourself up from bed to get yourself to lectures can be hard, which is what we try to say when we say executive function is something neurodivergent students struggle with. And I feel like when we say executive function plays a big part in affecting a student's daily life, what we try to say is the massive impact it has on the learning process of a person. Because everyday examples of executive dysfunction, which is the opposite of executive function, includes task paralysis, time blindness, emotional dysregulation. For example, even before studying, just getting ourselves to sit down with books, because we just cannot sit down in one place with books unless we have that suitable environment to do so properly. Or if it's a topic that we're not really interested in, that we're trying to study, just the monotony of it would stop us completely from even getting started itself. So that's what executive dysfunction in neurodivergent students look like. And there's often so much internalized shame and guilt that comes with struggling. I'm sure Arya would agree as well. We'll be talking about the different study struggles, different academic challenges we as students face, and hopefully come up with different tools and techniques that seem to help us as students. We'll be discussing how well it worked for us and probably come up with suggestions on how you can apply it as a listener as well. What do you think, Arya?
Yeah, so kind of what you said, Lisa, what we're going to try and do today is tell you guys about some tips that you can use to maximize your efficiency while studying, because as a neurodivergent student, it is essential to have certain strategies in place to ensure that you can concentrate for as long as possible, because that's a very big thing. But kind of like what you said before, I think this process starts before we sit down to study, because again, for us, sitting down with a book and just reading for hours, it is very difficult. I think that creating the best possible environment to guarantee as much as possible the success of executive function, kind of like what you said, is a good place to start. And we cannot actually sit down to study before we have a suitable environment to do so. And one thing that I will say with this is that I'm sort of segueing into the studying tips now, but one thing that really worked for me, and I think that this isn't just specific to neurodivergent students, it can be for neurotypical students as well, making sure that you don't study in the same place that you sleep is very important, I think. Having specific associations in your brain to specific places is actually really helpful. So if you're studying in your bedroom, for example, immediately for me personally, when I sit down at my desk in my bedroom, I start feeling sleepy and I want to take a nap. And the reason why is because in my brain, I already associated that place to resting and sleeping. And I think it is very important to first begin by having a very specific place. That could be a library, it could be a study room at your accommodation, it could be any place that where you feel comfortable studying. Just going to that place only to study. Having a very clear idea of the fact that that's the only task that you're going to fulfill at that place, so that you can immediately, as you sit down, you switch on that part of your brain that says, okay, it's time to start studying. It's time to concentrate. That's one thing that's really helpful for me. And the second thing that I would say, I actually haven't tried this myself, but I just read about it online, that apparently using specific scents while you're studying, so for example, putting a candle of a specific scent also helps with associating the idea. For example, that scent is associated to studying. So if you just put a candle, vanilla candle, let's give an example, every time that you're studying, your brain switches on sort of that part that it's going to use to concentrate. So I think those are good places to start. Lisa, I know you have a lot of ideas and you have built a lot of strategies over the years about how to most effectively study. So I'd love to hear from you what you think.
I think I completely relate with you when you say do not study in your bedroom, because your brains automatically associate your bedroom with rest. So when you try to study there, it's not just as effective. I can completely agree, because every time I try to study in my room, I fall asleep almost immediately. And that sort of creates this negative cycle of me. Whatever the subject that I try to study in my bedroom, I immediately end up hating the subject. So that again, when I try to study it in a different place as well, I still struggle to study it. So the best study hack for me, especially during exam season, would be just getting myself to a library or a common area. For me, at least, body doubling is something that works very well. It can be virtual or in person. It's just having someone else who is accountable for how much work you get done. It almost feels like a competition to some extent, like someone is watching you and you almost have to sort of get more work done than the other person. So body doubling is something that works. While on the theme of sort of competition, for neurodivergent brains, gamification of different things work really well. For example, if it's a very monotonous task that you're trying to study, if you try to make it sort of like a quiz with different reward system or a point system, or try to work on the specific quiz with a couple of your friends who are all working with a sort of shared goal, it seems to work for me, because the more competition there is for something, the more productive I am at what I'm doing. So if it's something that I can't really work on with friends, or if it's not something that I can sort of gamify, then I use apps like Habitica or Forest. So these are, for example, you set a specific amount of time, and then if you study for, let's say, 15 minutes, then you've grown this tree, and this little tree is now your reward. So something like that. It may sound silly, but it actually works in that moment. And I really liked what you said about the descent as well. I study psychology, so I learn a bit about how memory works. And one of the main things we learned last semester, so it was a very fun experiment. So this famous psychologist, he recruited a set of divers as in the people who dive into the swimming pool. And he made them study a list of words underwater and made them recall the words when they came out of the water. And he learned that when the divers who encoded those words or learned those words while they were underwater, they were able to recall those words just as effectively when they recalled it underwater compared to when they recalled it outside, which was quite fun because it made this unconscious realization for me, because I drink a lot of coffee. And if I'm studying something whilst drinking coffee, when I drink coffee again whilst recalling it, let's say in an exam context or in an exam room, I sometimes find the different things coming back. So if I'm initially revising in an exam condition setting, so let's say in a quiet setting with a lot of people who are all extremely focused, then when I'm back again in that exam setting, I find it easy for me to recall that information I studied. Although that might be something that wouldn't necessarily work for everyone, it seems to work for me. So that is one of the main things I feel like we need to emphasize in this episode, that the different methods that seems to work for Arya and I may not work for you. It might work for you, but to each their own. And every single person is different from each other. Again, as like a Gen Z person, turning my lecture notes into audio summaries, or this might sound really silly, but brain rot summaries almost. I upload my journals onto an audio generator called Dr. Pickle, and it generates this really funny TikTok style videos for me. So I'll just scroll through them when I feel like I don't want to actually revise something serious or concrete. So I find myself doing absurd, silly stuff, but they seem to work for me.
Another sort of disclaimer that I want to add after you said sort of every tip that we're going to give obviously isn't going to work for everybody. One thing that you can try as the listeners is, first of all, we're going to be talking about a lot of different skills in this episode. And I think that trying to cram all of them into one day all of a sudden could be a recipe for disaster, because it could be very overwhelming. Maybe always just try implementing one skill at a time. Doing everything at once, again, is too much. So you can think of it like as an experiment. Implement one of these tips to your study session one day, and then afterwards, at the end of the day, it would be a good idea to check in with yourself actively, asking yourself, okay, what went well about this skill during my study session? Did this work for me? What could perhaps be better? Is this a suitable alternative for me to use in the future? Or do I want to try out more methods to sort of optimize the efficiency of my study sessions? I think that having active reflection and following basically how you're feeling about it in the moment also, because we don't wake up as the same versions of ourselves every day. One thing can work for you one day, and then the next day it might not, which is completely fine. And that's sort of why we're trying to offer such a wide range of alternatives, because you can use one or the other.
I think that was a really good point when you said stop and reflect on what is working, because I feel like as a neurodivergent person, there is this common norm that everyone needs to revise the same way. For example, if you're someone who is, let's say, is someone who is doing a degree that includes a lot of reading, you are constantly given a lot of journals to read, textbooks to read. If you are someone who struggles with reading a lot of information, let's say if you have dyslexia or autism or ADHD for that matter, you can't get yourself to sit in one place and process a lot of information at the same time. So don't be sort of afraid to switch it up. Don't try to stick to the conventional methods and feel bad about it, because there are obviously other methods. You can maximize your sensory output by getting someone to read it for you, or audiobooks are always an option. You can always turn on the dictation option on, let's say, Word or Microsoft or whatever it is, and it'll read the notes out for you. So switching things up and basically listening to your body and brain and seeing what works best for you is one of the biggest things that'll help you?
Actually, it's a very important one, like we said, because at the end of the day, we're ever changing, and not everything is always going to work the same way. So it's great to have this many options. So another thing that I want to add as a tip is we're always focused on studying the material, but actually, kind of like what you said, Lisa, it's very hard to sit down and concentrate on so much information at the same time. But in an exam situation, sometimes, let's say you have an hour and a half or 2 hours and you just have to sit there and concentrate while there's so many distractions happening around you and you cannot control any of it. So it is very helpful to practice doing a test. But of course, we all do practice tests. But what I mean by this is specifically putting, let's say, something on the side, like a music. For me, what distracts me the most is lyrics, or if somebody's speaking, because I will latch onto the words. So putting some sort of, for example, a song with lyrics on the side and trying to do the test at the same time, because the circumstances that are going to happen on the day, you might not be able to control them. Because of that, it's good to be prepared sometimes for anything that just might happen. And then your mind is wandering off and then you have to get back into what you're doing. So having something on the side, just for the sole purpose of getting you distracted and seeing if you can power through. I think doing this practice every day, especially if you're approaching an important test, because that's an extra stimulant that you have to take into account as a neurodivergent person. But yeah, that tip is very helpful for me, actually, in general. If I'm studying something like from a textbook, or as a musician, if I'm practicing as well, it's good to have something on the side that is just meant to be there to distract you so that you can sort of practice building that concentration muscle, per se.
I think it's also worth adding that sometimes, despite how much you try to practice, it just doesn't work. There might be some people who feel that way. I'm someone who certainly feels that way. Despite how much I try to practice with music in the background, even the slightest bit of noise is extremely distracting for me, which is why I've got a special part in my university support plan, which allows me to wear noise-cancelling headphones to the exam itself. Because even the smallest and slightest things, like the air conditioning being turned on in the exam hall, can be very overstimulating for me. That makes it difficult for me to focus on the exam at hand. So I feel like sometimes just there is so much support available for you as a university student. As a first step, it would be identifying what your body wants and identifying the different needs you might have, and then sort of going to your university's disability service and asking for that adjustments which come for it, because your brain is wired differently. It's only fair that you have different arrangements when it comes to your assessment, because some people make it seem like it's unfair because you get additional adjustments, like, let's say, early access to slides when it comes to lectures, or additional time when it comes to writing an exam. That is completely untrue, because your brain is wired differently. It does not mean that you're at disadvantage or advantage. You just need to have a bit more support, or things have to be changed a little bit when it comes to how you're going to be assessed. So I think, especially in a university context, as a student, building that personal support system, I don't know, speaking to your personal tutor about it, speaking to your university's wellbeing service about it, speaking to your university's disability support network about it, and asking for that adjustments itself can be very beneficial to your development and how well you do in your academics.
I'm going to ask about that noise cancelling headphone thing, because wow, that would be so helpful for me, honestly. I didn't know that you could. I know that you can request some things, but I didn't know you could request something like that. That's great. I'm definitely going to have a chat with my disability advisor, because that would be so helpful. Also, kind of going on what you're saying, I sometimes feel almost ashamed to ask for help about certain things, because I feel like sometimes I'm asking for too much, or I just feel almost embarrassed that I have to ask for this when other people don't. But it's exactly what you're saying. There's nothing to feel shame about, because our brains just work differently and there's nothing you can do about that. So instead of working against it, you can optimize the conditions around you so that you can work with it. But yeah, the point that you made is very important, and I will definitely look into that myself for sure. That would be so helpful for me as well. Another point that I wanted to add in general, just going back to the tips that we're offering, is when we're physically or mentally tired, it is, of course, our symptoms can flare up. It is much more difficult to focus while studying, but also because sometimes you just don't have another option. You just have to, you have deadlines or whatever. And of course, we can ask for adjustments depending on our needs from our university. But in particular circumstances where, of course, we're just tired and we have to get things done. So I think it was a couple months ago that I was watching a video by this YouTuber called Vincent Chan, and he was talking about a concept called transitional activity. And the video was basically on optimizing his use of evening time after work, but I sort of applied this to my study sessions, and it really helped. So basically, the concept that he's referring to is that when one part of your brain or body is tired, you should use the non-tired part of your brain to reset your energy levels. So an example, if you're really tired after lectures and you used a lot of your brain power, you need to reset your energy levels by doing something physical. So you can take a walk, go to the gym, but blocking a certain amount of time in your calendar, especially if you know that you're going to be doing, for example, activities back to back that are going to use your mental energy, having that time to do something physical so that while you're doing that activity, the part of your brain that has been overused can rest and recover. That has been something that really helped for me. And also it helped with my concentration just because I come into it with a more fresh mind after receiving so many stimulations from around me all day and so much information that I have to process. It is important. It actually serves sort of as a time to process those things, because while you're doing something else, your brain, what it's doing when it's resting is that it's going through all of that information that you had to intake throughout the day.
That makes complete sense. And I think one other thing also would be just letting go of shame and sticking to non-traditional methods of working. For example, I liked when you said when you're mentally tired, then you do something physically stimulating so that you let your mind rest. And then when you're physically exhausted, then you can do something that requires more of your mind. And I think that is so true. And it can also be applied in like different contexts when it comes to like working in short bursts. For example, as someone with ADHD, I can get hyperfixated on things quite easily. So if I'm very interested in doing something that could traditionally take 5 to 6 hours, I can finish in 2 hours because I'm really interested in what I'm doing. I'm incredibly invested in it. So it doesn't matter the time. It's like 1 a.m. in the morning and I've randomly woken up and I've decided to do this thing. So don't feel almost that shame that comes with it because you're normal for doing it. It's just your normal. It's not everyone else's normal. So sort of work around it. And one of the main things that it sort of ties together all the different facts we've spoken about today is that neurodivergence isn't a struggle almost. It just needs a different style of learning. And we just have to come to acceptance with that fact. And the more we come to acceptance with it, the less shame we have about it, the more we're able to work with our minds, work with our bodies, and be more effective, be more productive, and just be the best of who we are. Don't you agree?
I completely agree with everything that you said. A big part about shame comes from the fear of being judged by the people around us for the adjustments that we require, or the fact that we simply just do things differently from other people who could be put under the term of neurotypical, let's say. But it's just, I sometimes find it sort of strange that we're looked at as people who have somewhat of a disability almost, because what is disability? It's just a different way of being. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just, again, kind of like what you were saying, Lisa, and the fact that we also said it several times throughout this episode is just that you just have to work with it. Resisting it doesn't do any good. If anything, it makes the symptoms flare up more because you're physiology just goes against the fact that you're trying to do things in a way that isn't meant for you. It's so much better to work with it. And actually, neurodivergence can be a real superpower when you do work with it. Because, for example, what you're saying about having those outbursts of energy where you're really focused and you really get a lot of work done, that can be a real superpower at times. Or neurodivergent people tend to be the people who have the most interesting ideas. They're so incredibly creative and have so much interesting input on so many different areas of life that I think it is very important to make sure that that's completely okay. And actually these are the people that make life more interesting and fun, and they truly add to the experience.
The key takeaways from all the information that we've just spoken about today, just think of it as an experiment. Implement with one of these different tips that we've spoken about, because we've spoken about a lot of tips that works differently for both Arya and I. Implement one of these steps to your study session one day and then another one on another day. And like Arya said, check in with yourself actively. Is there something that went well? If there is something that went well, is there something that I could do differently which could make me more productive? Or is there something that could use more work? Is this alternative suitable for me compared to a traditional method that I was constantly using before, which didn't really make me understand the concepts that I was studying as much as I'm doing now? Do I want to try out more methods to optimize the efficiency of my study session? So yeah, we've given you a lot of tips. What might work really well for one person might not work for another, but it always doesn't hurt to try. And being neurodivergent can be turned into an absolute superpower, like we've reiterated so many times in this episode. So if you know how to rely on your strengths and get the most out of your potential as a person, this episode is for you.
And yeah, I would say that wraps up today's episode of the Neurodivergent Study Survival Guide. We really do hope that it gave you some useful tools, new perspectives, and most importantly, a reminder that you're not alone, because we've also been through these experiences and we're here for you. We're here to support you and tell you about our experiences so that we can relate to each other. And thank you so much for listening. And once again, remember that it's okay to learn in ways that work for you, because progress isn't linear and your brain does not need fixing. It just needs understanding. This podcast is part of Life as a Neurodivergent Student, brought to you by Student Minds and All Things Mental Health. Be sure to check out the rest of the series for more conversations on mental health, identity, and neurodivergent experiences in higher education. You can also check out the Student Space website curated by Student Minds for more resources.